Thought I'd put on bigger display. Let's see what I got here in the studio going on. Always keep my Princess Leia up here. This was actually purchased in Turkey and given to me as a gift. And it just so happened that this is the picture that was always up. And then when she died, I just never changed it. So, always a little inspiration. Behind me is my wall of fame here. So we can go through just to share my little pride here. So the bands that have influenced my life and artists and so forth. Over here to my left is David Bowie. That's a signed photograph that I have a lot of pride in having. Then his album Black Star up on the top. This album here is a band called Slowdive. This is their new album. If you're not familiar with Slowdive, that band will change your life. Below that is a band called Catherine Wheel, album called Chrome. It's probably in my top 5 favorite albums of all time. Over here, the Peter Hook and the Light. Peter Hook is the bass player from New Order and Joy Division. If you're not familiar, go educate yourselves because let's just say that's important. But anyway, the Light is, he's been performing a lot of the New Order and Joy Division songs on his own with a band. And so I got a poster from that and got that signed from Peter Hook. Below that, that little small one, the black and white right there, is Talking Heads. And below, of course, we got the Beatles. So, yeah, very electronic, isn't it? But you know what? You got to put the artists that actually got you started in this whole thing. And I think for many of us, it wasn't always electronic music. And all these influences. Oh, I'm sorry. All the way over to the left is a band called Ride, another one of my favorite bands. It's actually a T-shirt that I had framed. Went to the show and got it signed by all the guys. So these are just artists that inspire me, and just having that behind me just reminds me of why I do what I do, you know? Most of you guys don't know that I've been doing music for quite a while. So I didn't start going exclusively electronic until 1996. And from 1987 to 96, I played guitar in bands, and I did, in one of the bands, I did all the keyboards, all the programming, all the drums, and that sort of thing. So I was already starting getting involved with electronic tools and things like that. But I dove completely in 96. Also, my T-shirt is another band that I'm really influenced by. So if you've ever heard of Bauhaus, if you've ever heard of Love and Rockets, if you've ever heard of Peter Murphy, all great bands. Tones on Tail is kind of a side project from a couple of the guys from Bauhaus. So check them out as well. See, I'm feeding you guys great music so that it will inspire your electronic attitudes and your creativity. If I just told you guys all about tons of different electronic bands, and then you would just kind of sound like everyone else, sort of thing. But when you have inspirations that come kind of outside of your genre, then you're really injecting some new ideas. So always explore music. I find it really depressing now that people don't go to record stores anymore. I don't go to record stores anymore, really. It used to be that you couldn't get a hold of records. You had to special order them. You had to drive for an hour or two to like 3 different places, hoping that they had the album that you were looking for. If I couldn't afford the album, I would take the albums that I wanted to buy later, and I'd hide them in the Julio Iglesias section of the record store so that I could come back and find those records. Sometimes that worked, and sometimes they caught my little collection and moved them back. So sometimes they'd be sold out. But now we just have access to so much music, and no one takes advantage of it. It's ridiculous. A wealth of music over the past, 70 years is available at your fingertips. Why are you not exploring new artists all the time? Why aren't you filling your head with these inspirations? It's crazy. This isn't even the point that I'm trying to get to. It's just me sharing kind of my opinion on what's going on with music these days. I also find it a little bit sad that electronic music has turned into the modern pop music, because I got into electronic music because it was very different. You know, it was daring. It expanded the way that I thought music could be, you know. And it seems that when anything gets popular, they try to dumb it down to something that, you know, the pop audience will love. And pop music used to be a great thing, I think, but I just think over the last 20 years or so, it's gone downhill a little bit. Even though there's great bands that you can find, sadly, still the top 40 artists seem to be the only things that people are listening to for the most part. And people aren't digging deeper, even though it's totally available to you guys. So I'm just hoping that all of you guys are having conversations with your friends and everyone else, like I used to do. You know, we would drink beers and we would listen to an album and stare at the album cover and talk about like what the meaning of certain songs might be. And, you know, we all have different opinions on things like that. And I don't know if people have as much of a passion about music as they used to, in that way. You know what I mean? People, of course, people will always like music, but it's just kind of sad to me. It's a little different, and very few people have the patience to listen to a full album the way that it was intended to be listened to. And very few people like go and like set time to like make room for this wonderful new music. Because even though pop music has probably gotten worse than it ever has, and it sounds more the same than it ever has in the past, there's some amazing bands coming out that should be much more popular, in my opinion. So anyway, that's my opinion. And you're either going to vibe with that or you're not. Maybe you're of the opinion that the reason you came to electronic music is because it turned into pop music, and that's what pulled you in. That's all great, you know, as long as you've listened to the other stuff and educated yourself and decided, you know what, I connect with pop music straight up. I know the other stuff. I'm totally aware of it. It's kind of like a certain band. Like in the past, I'd be, you know, into these bands, and, you know, I'd see them progress and everything. And I'd be a huge fan of the band. And I would almost be embarrassed when they came out with an album that was really big. And it ended up being my favorite album of theirs, you know, and I'd have to tell people, look, I love this band, and I've loved them all the way since way back when, in the early albums. I love all that stuff. But I've got to say, this particular album that just happens to be popular is their best work, in my opinion, you know. So I'd say embrace pop music if it really speaks to you. If you've let all different kinds of music speak to you, and that's just what connects with you, great. But if you're listening to that, or if you're an artist and you feel like, well, you got to consider, is the reason that I love this music because of the reaction that music gets with an audience, or is it because it actually connects with your soul? Because so many people in this field want to be popular, they want to be known, so they almost convince themselves that they like a certain kind of music because that music tends to get a better reaction. So it just makes it much easier for them. I'm just going to get into this pop sound, and then I'm going to have a big audience, and then my career is going to blow up or whatever, right? So some people like the pop thing because of the lifestyle, but not because of the sound. So that's just something to consider, you know? You can always count on me to give you truth, you know? We're always going to disagree on what we think is great music, you know what I mean? We come from different things. Like for me, I started off being in like a goth and 80s band, you know, right? So I always liked kind of the weird stuff anyway. And then from there, it moved into like industrial music, bands like Nitsarev and Front 242 and Skinny Puppy, and these really dark electronic music that DJs were playing in the clubs. Like it just encapsulated you, you know, and that was like right when really electronic music, you were listening to it and going, wow, there's like no live instruments. This is all electronics. And how crazy is it, all these original sounds that you're hearing? So that was like my first inspiration. And then there were bands that were kind of crossover, which was like into more like rave sort of music. That would be like artists like Eon, E-O-N. You should check them out as well. They do a song called The Spice Must Flow. And that was kind of an introduction into electronic music for me. There was other artists like Lords of Acid, 808 State, of course. And then came like, the artists that really changed everything. You had the Chemical Brothers, you had Underworld, you had Orbital, you had the Prodigy, and all these artists, also Left Field, and all these artists were not pop bands at all. They all came from this underground, and that's what really did it for me. So, but some people come from like, and don't get me wrong, I love my disco. I love, everything about that sort of dance music as well. So I like good pop. That's why I said, pop used to be pretty good. I thought 70s pop music was great. 80s pop music was great. 60s pop music, of course. You could play any of that now and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that song. Anyway, so that's how I came to getting into electronic music.